So, James, how long was your journey towards enlightenment? How long did it take you to get enlightened? Let's be specific. How many hours? Did you put in your 10,000 hours?
All in, I think it was about 2.5 years. Hours-wise, man, I have no idea. It was probably nowhere close to 10,000 hours. I don't think I ever had a day where it was more than 4 hours actually focused on it.
Was this your sole focus and overwhelming desire? Did you have other things going on in your life? Did you disentangle from normal, everyday, ordinary affairs?
It was the most important thing to me, but no, I still had a lot of other things going on. I was going to college at the time. I was working about 30 hours a week, and I was actually training jiu-jitsu when I first started getting into it, and I stopped doing that so that I would have time to read, have time to reflect and introspect, and eventually kind of gradually disentangled myself from other things.
What about all these people who put in their 10,000 hours, all the self-inquiry, all the meditation, all the yoga retreats, all the spiritual questioning? They've been working at it for 20 years. What are they doing wrong?
The reality is most of these people are not truly interested in enlightenment, and because they're not really interested in enlightenment, there are 10,000 different micro things they're doing wrong, and it would take you an entire lifetime to catalog all of them and name them. The real solution is just genuinely having an interest in enlightenment, and all of those problems solve themselves. Just in enlightenment, and all of those problems solve themselves.
What is the problem in the first place? What does it even mean to try and be enlightened? It feels very fuzzy to me. I've heard Kapil Gupta say it's the end of all chases. Some people think of it as like a marvelous, brilliant experience where you live in a psychedelic, mystical state connected in union with God. Others think that it's just you're floating on air. What is this magical state? Do you levitate physically, mentally?
There have been a lot of descriptions. Most of them are accurate in some sense because they describe an aspect of the experience or a consequence of becoming enlightened. But to me, the core of it is life without self. So I think of as enlightenment as whatever remains, whatever that state is, when you no longer see a self within you.
So you've described this as a process of looking and looking and looking until you're convinced it's not there. Is that roughly correct? And to be clear, we're talking about a psychological self. There is a mind, there is a body. Those are real things, real in quotes.
Yeah, the problem is if you're looking for yourself and the truth of the matter is that there is no self, you can't find the absence of a self because it's not a thing. What happens is you look and look and look and you continually fail to find a self. And eventually it dawns on you that there is no self because you've looked everywhere and you still haven't seen it.
And when you finally realize there's no such thing, is it a mystical experience? How do you feel?
So I had a very clear moment when I found enlightenment, even though I didn't realize that was what it was at the time. And in that moment, you know, people talk about having out-of-body experiences where it's like they're floating above and behind their body looking at themselves. And in that same sense, it was an out-of-mind experience for me. So it was like all the contents of my mind were laid out in front of me and I could see the falsehoods in them. But in terms of the everyday lived experience of the enlightened state, it's pretty damn similar to what normal life was like before.
Do you still experience suffering? Do you experience bliss?
I don't experience suffering. Bliss, it really depends on how you mean bliss. I wouldn't choose that word necessarily because to me it invokes this sense of an altered kind of high. And my life doesn't feel like I'm perpetually high. It feels like I'm just very lucid and naturally at peace.
Did you ever meditate, do yoga, self-inquiry, who am I, all that stuff?
I meditated for, I think, around 150 days, roughly, towards the start of my search, and then I dropped it and never picked it back up again. Yoga, I've done on and off throughout the years, but it was never really a part of my search for enlightenment. It was more just for the physical benefits of it. The real bulk of what I did in the search for enlightenment and what I think led to it was self-inquiry, introspection, and reading books from other enlightened people.
What would happen if tomorrow you found out that you'd won $1 billion? How would you feel?
That'd be nice. I'd probably go out and buy some stuff, but in terms of general satisfaction with my life, it wouldn't move the needle.
What if you found out you had terminal cancer? You had a month to live. Let's say it wasn't going to be painful to the body, but sure as can be, you'd be dead within a month.
I got a parking ticket last week. I think finding out I had cancer would feel about the same.
Can everyone be enlightened?
Hypothetically, sure. It's just a matter of the genuine desire to get there.
Should everyone be enlightened? Should they try?
I think if you're very attached to your sense of self and someone took that away from you, it would be a very unpleasant experience. I don't for one second think everyone should pursue enlightenment or even everyone should want enlightenment. I think if they knew what it was, they would naturally orient themselves towards it.
Do you need to finish playing all the games first? Or do you need to suffer so much that you need to get away from the suffering and then you find it or naturally gravitate towards it? Or will mere curiosity do? Or mere intellect?
I didn't win all the games first. I didn't even suffer that much. I just had a genuine interest in finding the truth. And so I followed it.
Is there anything spiritual or mystical or otherworldly about the process? And what about all these people going on retreats and doing yoga and meditation and practicing loving kindness and chanting mantras? Are they just wasting their time?
There are parts of it that go beyond pure logic or rationality. So I suppose you could call those spiritual or mystical. But otherworldly, no, I would not say so. Enlightenment is truth realization, and what is truth but the very world we live in? Some people say they benefit from the retreats, the meditation, the yoga, all the various other practices. So I'd say if you're benefiting from it, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just that I took what I see as the direct route, which is self-inquiry. It's looking directly into the illusion. The only reason people are unenlightened in the first place is that they have a misconception about who they are. So the direct path to enlightenment is just challenging that misconception.
People are studying and talking about the science of consciousness. Jed McKenna talks about it. There's a room on this app about it. The idea being that consciousness is primary and the material world arises within consciousness and so is secondary. Is that kind of reasoning or thinking true in your experience? Is it helpful in the search for enlightenment? Is it relevant?
From the standpoint of experience, it's true and it is self-evident. But to me, it seems like a stretch to say that that is the nature of the world. And the reason it seems like a stretch is that I am only aware of the things I am aware of. If there is anything outside of my awareness, by definition, I'm not aware of it, so I don't know about it. So for me to say that my experience dictates the nature of the universe, or that because consciousness is primary in my experience, that the material world comes out of consciousness or consciousness precedes the material world, that to me seems like a stretch. It seems like a claim to know something I could not possibly know. In terms of how helpful that is to the search for enlightenment, I don't think it's helpful. The only helpfulness that is in that sort of genre is the idea that consciousness precedes your experience of reality. That the base state of pure consciousness is what's behind all your thoughts and your emotions and your feelings, and all the content of experience that you get mixed up in.
How about approaching it from the other side? Instead of looking for the self, rather you settle into awareness. You meditate on the awareness and have awareness about awareness. You notice how awareness can be used to observe everything and can be a witness to your experience. Do you need to see through the illusion of the self, or rather can you abide into awareness directly? Is that a path?
If a person can do that, I do think it's a viable path. The only reason why I don't really promote it or I don't articulate it in that way is that the mind is a very fickle thing. It's a very clever thing. So it always finds a way to reshape your image of your own ego to perpetuate it. And so what happens when people start to look for the witness or try to see themselves as the witness is they take on the identity of the witness. So now it is just the ego under another name, under another form, and they really haven't gotten anywhere.
Is the mind an adversary of some sorts? A prison keeper, a warden, someone that's keeping you trapped in a false sense or false self-image?
It's more that the mind is the prison and it creates the sense of a prisoner. And as long as one believes in the prisoner, the mind remains a prison. But the moment that idea disappears, the mind is a very pleasant place to be. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not an adversary. It's not out to get you. The problem isn't the mind. The problem is having a delusional mind.
What do you give up by being enlightened? Can you still experience the same levels of joy and pleasure? Do you still fall in love? Are you still driven to do things? Or are you just kind of breezing through life, casual, detached, aware, but not interested in anything or anyone?
There's one description of enlightenment that I really like, where someone said it's exactly the same as ordinary life, only about 2 inches off the ground. So it is very much like casually breezing through life, not caring a whole lot about any particular thing, very detached. But there are still things that I enjoy. There are still things I find interesting. And so when I do pursue something now, it's purely because I find it interesting or enjoyable. It's not because I have some need to achieve things or acquire things.
If there's no need to achieve things or acquire things, then why talk at all? Why do this channel? Why do other channels? Why do podcasts? Why do tweets? Why try to make money? Why have a coaching business?
Part of it is that it's just fun for me. I enjoy doing it. I like having deep conversations and talking about interesting things. And the other part of it is that making money is practical. Do I need it? Of course not. But I find having money preferable to being homeless. If you give me a choice between the two, I would take the mansion over the bench on the street corner every time.
But what would a life living on a bench on the street be for you? Would you be suffering? Would you be in angst? Would you be unhappy?
I don't think it would be all that different. I mean, there are a couple of things that would change that would be semi-significant, like how comfortable I am and my physical health. But aside from that, what are the real differences? My days would largely be spent in the same way, and I wouldn't suffer. I wouldn't be unhappy because of it, because I'm already perfectly satisfied, and my satisfaction is not dependent on circumstance.
If your satisfaction is not dependent on circumstance, then is this a natural way of living? Why live at all? Why would you be on this earth if all things would satisfy? What would be the point of even having a life and living a life?
It's not so much that all things satisfy equally. I do still have preferences. It's just that my sense of satisfaction in life doesn't depend on anything external. So I could be in the worst situation imaginable, And if you ask me if I'm satisfied with my life, the answer is still yes, unequivocally, because it doesn't matter. It doesn't depend on the external. Now, having said that, I do really enjoy life. I find it to be a wonderful experience. The question of why bother living at all, why bother having a life, that question never arises for me. I see that question as completely irrelevant, completely immaterial.
Is there good and evil, right and wrong, things that you want to affect and change the natural course of their outcome?
Good and evil and right and wrong are complete projections of mind. And what I mean by that is that they only exist in thought. They don't exist anywhere in reality. And because they do not exist anywhere in reality, that means they are pure imagination, which is really just another way of saying they don't exist.
Is there a God, or is the universe conscious? Does it care?
I've never come across any God or universal consciousness, so I would put myself in the agnostic category when it comes to these questions. The problem with these questions is that it's very easy to say, yes, you believe it, or no, you don't believe it, but it's very difficult to definitively prove one way or another.
Your statements have the ring of truth in them, and there's logic, but where's the love? Is there universal love? Do you feel love not in the personal romantic sense, but in the grand untargeted sense? Is love the foundation of the universe? Does the oneness that you feel or the lack of selfness that you feel manifest in any way as love? What about all these gurus and all these enlightened people who talk about love or talk about God? Where are they coming from?
I do absolutely feel that universal sense of love, and I do feel intrinsic compassion for everyone, but it's just not something that I really pay that much attention to, so I don't talk about it very often. It's like, you don't focus on the fact that there's air all around you, you're breathing, because it's just obvious. It's an understood part of your experience that doesn't require you to call attention to it.
Is there any belief or faith or teachings that are required to be followed? Or is everything just known? Is there a shred of belief or faith?
There's no belief needed. Belief is just certainty without knowledge. For that matter, it's not even about knowledge either. It's really about diving deep into what the experience of being alive is really like and developing that understanding that comes from paying very close attention. There are a lot of people out there that are into spirituality that know the teachings far, far better than I do. And so it's really not about understanding the teachings. The teachings are just one person's attempt to explain what the experience is like or to give tips on how to get there. But really what's important is to do it for yourself, not to get hung up on any particular teaching or spend a lot of time trying to understand esoteric concepts.
When I pay close attention and I look for the self, I don't necessarily find a character called the self who's just masquerading around in plain sight. Rather, I find thoughts, I find feelings, I find images, I find perceptions, I find sensations, I find the body, I find the mind. But I also find a pattern in behavior that I can recognize. And could I not say that the self is the mind-body pattern, and the self is an emergent property of the mind-body pattern combined with awareness? And that's what I am. That's myself, awareness plus mind plus body, behaving in habitual and genetic patterns of conditioning. What's wrong with that being the definition of the self? Why is the self missing? Why is that not it? Sure, it manifests in different ways at different times, but there is a pattern to it. Isn't that pattern the self? Like the ship of Theseus, the ship itself has had all of its parts replaced, but the pattern of the ship remains.
It's good that you bring up the ship of Theseus, because in that example, the ship really is just a concept. When all of the parts have been replaced and you're still referring to the ship of Theseus, what do you really mean when you say the ship of Theseus? It's this idea you have of the structure that was put together by all these various parts that has a certain history and has done certain things and gone certain places. But if that concept disappears, then it's just a ship. And yes, it's more than its parts because the parts work together in a congruent way and they turn into this object that has these different capacities, such as sailing. But it doesn't have a self-identity. The identity is just a concept. And when the concept disappears, there's no self there. So it's the same way for a human being. Because we think we are this person and we believe it so strongly, it does appear to be consistent. It does appear to be this lasting thing. But when that thought disappears, there's no such thing as a self. And if it's completely dependent upon the thought, that means it has no existence of its own.
So it seems the core of this is a misidentification with the mind and thoughts as a self. And this is a powerful and persistent misidentification. But if one does not identify with the thoughts and the self, then what are you? Wouldn't it be damaging to your sense of self-preservation, for example, to drop that identification? Who would protect the body? Who would take care of the brain? Who would meet its needs for eating and doing? Would you still function with the same efficiency? Is there value in being a good person? Is there value in trying to be present, trying to be calm, trying to be kind? Is there value in expressing and giving love? Is there value in living as an enlightened person would live, even if you yourself are not enlightened? Jed McKenna said something along the lines of, I work for the universe, and I took that to heart. If I live my life that way, am I LARPing? Am I pretending? Am I just pretending to have arrived when I'm actually nowhere? Or is it in some way helpful? Does it increase my chances of arrival, which I understand is a desire? But if I am working in harmony with what I think is best for the whole, then does it somehow align me better with the whole and lessen and diminish my sense of self and increase the odds, so to speak?
So the trouble with answering this question is answering it in such a way that does not simply create a new self-concept. So what are you when you break your identification? You're what's ever left. You are what remains when you stop thinking of yourself as a self. And what's left over? Well, the body and mind are still there. The latent tendencies you have are still there for the most part. There are certain things that change as a result of realization, but they only change because you see the flaws in your previous thinking. So really what happens when you become enlightened is you just drop your old ways of doing things that you realize no longer made any sense. But you don't lose your self-preservation instincts or anything like that. You still take care of yourself. I would actually argue that I've started caring more about my health post-enlightenment than I ever did before, because I realize there are very few things that are important that are worth caring about, but that's one of them. I don't like to focus so much on external validation of certain ideas. So this question of, is there value in this, is there value in that, I would never approach it in that way. To me, it's more, do I value this? Is this something that I see as desirable? And if it is, then I pursue it. But when it comes to enlightenment, I don't see the point of trying to LARP as an enlightened person. I don't think it really moves the needle. Maybe it does 1 or 2%, but there, I think, are far better ways to spend your time if you're really pursuing enlightenment.
What is the best way to spend your time if you're pursuing enlightenment? What is the most effective? What is the most direct? Is it the same for everybody, or will it be different for different people? What is going to get you there the fastest with the mostest, so to speak? You didn't pray. You didn't meditate. You didn't put in the hours. 150 hours of meditation is nothing. You didn't chant the mantras. You didn't make the offerings. You didn't go to a monastery. You didn't study under a guru. You didn't sit under a Bodhi tree. You're not even brown, for God's sake. You don't grow up in the tradition. You have no certificate. You have no epaulets. You have no medals. You have no necklaces. You have no holy book. You have no guru. You have no right. How dare you? How dare you be young, white, and enlightened? It's an insult to everybody else who tried. How did you pull it off? Or are you just lying? How do we know? How do we know you're not a faker?
The reason everyone is not enlightened is that they have misconceptions about who they are. So the direct route to enlightenment is directly challenging those misconceptions. And that's what self-inquiry is. That's why there's the famous advice from Ramana Maharshi. Ask yourself, who am I? Ultimately, it's a waste of time trying to figure out if someone else is enlightened. You never have access to their experience of life. You can't peer inside their head and see what's going on. So it's an unanswerable question. The more important question is, does what they're saying resonate with you? Are they saying things that are guiding you to deeper realizations about reality, about yourself? Are they changing your life in some way? Or are they just talking and the words are falling flat?
Is there such a thing as progress on the path, or does it happen in an instant? Is there even a choice? Is there free will associated with this, that one can make the choice and then become intensely curious and cultivate that curiosity? Or is it going to happen or not, and you just kind of have to let go and accept your fate? From your position, is there any such thing as karma, fate, effectiveness of prayer? Jed McKenna says the universe is like a big playful puppy. Do you have any sense of that? Or is the universe cold, dark, uncaring? Is it a haunted house? What is the closest analogy to where we actually are? Is it a dreamscape? Is it God's dream? I hear all these different analogies. They mean kind of different things. What's yours?
There is such a thing as progress on the path to enlightenment. There is a successive breaking through certain illusions. But if it's not something that really captures your imagination or your curiosity or even just your mere interest, that isn't something you can just flip a switch and change. It has to be genuine. You can't just one day out of the blue decide you want to be enlightened and magically have this incredible desire for it. That's not how it works. There was one person, I forget who, but they described enlightenment as a diamond with many different faces. And depending on which face of the diamond you're looking at, it looks very different, but it is still the same diamond. So all of these various descriptions of the universe, as seen from the enlightened perspective, have their own grain of truth. But as is always the case with language, something is lost in translation. Something disappears when you try to put the experience into words. So the important thing is not to latch onto any one description, it's to experience it for yourself. And when you experience it for yourself, you can look at it and say, oh, that's what they meant when they said this. But until you have that experience, you're never going to get the interpretation quite right. I don't really have my own personal analogy for the enlightened perspective of the universe yet, but maybe I just haven't been in the guru game long enough. I'm sure I'll get there eventually.
Are we already all enlightened and we just don't realize it? Or is that a cope?
The confusing part about the statement, everyone is already enlightened, is that now enlightenment has taken on a new meaning. Normally, enlightenment refers to the realization of your true nature. But in this statement, saying that everyone is already enlightened, the word enlightened simply refers to your true nature. So it is true that everyone already possesses what they refer to as the Buddha nature, but not everyone realizes it. And realizing it is the important thing.
So is there something more that the Buddha knew that you may not? Or are you already at maximal knowledge? Put another way, are there any fundamental unanswered questions about the nature of truth and reality?
There are a lot of things that I still don't know, but when it comes to the fundamental nature of existence as a human being, no, I don't have any unanswered questions.
Do you ruminate? Do you obsess? Does your mind run out of control? Do you have thoughts that you can't stop? Do you have a lot of thoughts? What is your thought process like for solving problems, for dealing with situations?
If I do ruminate on something or obsess over something these days, it's always intentional. So if I get interested in some new topic or some field of study or something that I just haven't really gone into before, I'll very easily spend 8 or 10 or 12 straight hours just going into something, diving deep into it. But that's because it's interesting to me. It's not some out of control thing that I can't stop. So my mind doesn't just run on its own unchecked anymore. When it comes to dealing with normal everyday situations, they don't really require much thought, if any. It's only more complex problems where maybe the answer isn't immediately apparent that requires a bit of consideration.
What emotions do you still feel, and how strong are they?
I still feel a wide range of emotions. It's not like I became enlightened and turned into the Terminator or anything. It's just that they are never overpowering anymore. And there are certain emotions that I don't feel at all, like anger and jealousy.
Why don't you feel anger and jealousy at all? Those seem pretty big.
Honestly, I just don't see the point.
Do you ever get bored?
I get bored of doing specific things, so if I do something for long enough, eventually I won't feel like doing it anymore. But in a general sense, no, I don't ever get bored. I could sit and do nothing all day and never feel bored.